Welcome to another Feed Swap Saturday, and today I've got a show that's actually a nonfiction show, but I think you're going to like it. It's called Haunted American History. It's an independently produced podcast created by Christopher Feinstein, and it takes a campfire-style approach to storytelling, which is something I love, right? It delves into the eerie tales that have terrified Americans for generations. Now, each episode uncovers a different chilling story, blending folklore, history, and the supernatural into a narrative that's both captivating and spine-tingling. But y'all, what sets this particular show apart is its ability to make you feel like you're right there, huddled around the fire, hanging out with Chris as he chats with you, just listening to tales that blur the line between fact and fiction. So, look, if you enjoy this show, they've got over 160 episodes released since its debut in 2020. There's a wealth of haunting tales to explore, and whether you're a seasoned horror enthusiast or new to that kind of haunted history genre, Haunted American History is a great place to start. But don't take my word for it. Go ahead, subscribe now to Haunted American History on your favorite podcast app. But let's, in the meantime, check out an episode.
For approximately half a millennia, the human species has been engaging in monetary transactions. This practice was preceded by an era of bartering goods and services, which itself had evolved from a time when exchanges were primarily based on favors. We, as humans, we are wired for negotiation, exchange, and the establishment of debts and credits. Therefore, it really doesn't come as a shock that we often hold the word fate to such a high regard, believing that good fortune must be counterbalanced with a subsequent sacrifice. The concept of sacrifice as a ritual may have largely vanished from contemporary cultures across the globe, but one can't help but wonder if it has truly ceased to exist. The emotional underpinnings that fuel narratives about deal with the devil stories are very much prevalent in our society today. Over centuries, we have crafted a myriad of strategies to grapple with disparities in wealth, disparities in attractiveness, and even health. An anthropologist's perspective on this matter is particularly enlightening when considering in relation to supernatural beliefs and Pentecostalism. These scholars observe that witnessing inequalities can elicit responses ranging from pity to feelings of deprivation, depending on one's viewpoint. To redress these imbalances, the ethically appropriate reaction is an exchange. A gift, if you will, that reinstates a mutual respect and recognition. Until the feeling of imbalance is counteracted, the perception of imbalance has the potential to assume a negative form, jealousy. And that could potentially trigger destructive actions. This insightful analysis is extracted from the book Pentecostalism and Witchcraft: Supernatural Warfare in Africa and Malaysia, edited by Newt Rio, Michelle McCarthy, and Roy Blaines. The trope known as deal with the devil, or a Foustian bargain, finds its roots deeply embedded in cultural folklore. It draws inspiration from legendary tales such as those featuring Faust and Mephisto, while also being fundamental to many Christian traditions. Traditional Christian beliefs about witchcraft depict this pact as an agreement between a human and the devil, or another demon, where the human trades their soul for diabolical favors. These favors can vary greatly across different stories, and they typically include desires such as eternal youth, profound knowledge, immense wealth, fame, and even power. Some people were believed to enter into these pacts simply to acknowledge the demon as their master, with no expectation of receiving anything in return. However, this bargain is wrong, and it is full of danger. The price for the fiend's service is nothing less than an individual's soul. These tales often conclude with a moral lesson, condemning the reckless venture to eternal damnation. Alternatively, they might end on a humorous note, a clever peasant outsmarting the devil based on a technicality. In some instances, those who make these pacts attempt to deceive the devil, but inevitably, they all meet their downfall in the end. So who is Faust? Alright, Faust he's a real brainiac. He's a scholar, he's got books and PhDs and all those kind of things, if PhDs existed during that time. You know, all that jazz. And being so smart, he is bored out of his skull. So he's fed up. In fact, at some point, he even tries to off himself. But instead of going through with it, he decides to call upon the devil for some extra knowledge and maybe even a little magical powers. You know, the usual stuff that you want if you're looking to experience every pleasure and nugget of knowledge this world has to offer. Now, the devil doesn't show up personally. I mean, he's probably got better things to do, like stoke the fires of hell or something. But instead, he sends his sidekick, Mephisto, who comes with a deal for Faust. Mephisto will be at Faust's beck and call with the magical powers for a certain number of years. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. When the time is up, the devil gets to claim Faust's soul and make him his eternal minion. Faust thinks it over and decides, why not? So during their contract period, Faust uses Mephisto like a genie in the bottle. Now, in Goethe's version of the drama, and many others that followed, Mephisto helps Faust seduce an innocent beauty named Gretchen. Gretchen falls hard for him and ends up having his illegitimate kid. Overwhelmed by guilt and shame after giving birth to this child out of wedlock, she drowns the baby and ends up on death row for murder. Or the equivalent of whatever death row was at the time. But here's where things get interesting. Because she was pure at heart before all this mess happened with Faust, Gretchen gets saved at the end. After her execution, she goes straight to heaven thanks to her innocence and pleas to God as an embodiment of eternal femininity. As for our man Faust, in Goethe's version, God saves him because of his constant striving and Gretchen's appeals. In earlier versions, though, Faust isn't so lucky. He gets too deep into the sins and thinks there's no way out. When his contract is up, the devil comes to collect and drags him off to hell. These kinds of stories are often classified as Faustian tales. It's where the hero faces a major dilemma. Take all the riches in the world but lose your soul, or refuse to deal and live a life devoid of any good fortune. They're like thought experiments about sacrifice. Everyone has a price, right? What would yours be? So when we talk about something being Faustian, it usually means there's some ambitious person that has tossed their morals out the window for power and success for a set period of time. But here's the thing. Faust wasn't the only dude who made those kind of deals with the devil back in those days. Medieval folk loved these stories. Another one that was pretty popular was about this guy, Theophilus. He sold his soul to Satan but got major buyer's remorse afterwards. Don't we all? So he repented big time. He burned his contract with Satan and became known as Theophilus the Penitent. This story was also considered Faustian, but had a redemption twist that audiences at the time ate up. The reason why Dr. Faustus' story stuck around is probably due to timing. It first popped up in the 1500s when privileged men were getting really into esoteric knowledge. Nowadays, we're used to professionals having their own specialties, but back then, if you knew too much about something specific, people thought you were doing witchcraft. Ironically enough, the suspicion towards science peaked during Newton's era, an age we now associate with scientific revolution. As Terry Jones points out in his BBC documentary series, Medieval Lives, it was medieval philosophers who argued that revelation was to be found hidden in nature and uncovered by experiment. This was the true scientific revolution, and it was Newton's age that was the great age of superstition. It was in the 16th and 17th centuries that people started to believe that human beings could make a pact with the devil, and thereby gain supernatural powers. Talk about irony, huh? It's a pretty fun watch if you can get the chance to check it out. So let's take a trip back in time. The story of Faust's life was first let loose on the public in Frankfurt, but by 1592 it had been translated into English. Now get this, the title of the work is an absolute masterpiece. The History of the Damnable Life and Deserved Death of Dr. John Faustus. It's got a certain ring to it, right? Rolls off the tongue. Now, we don't know who did the translation from German to English. All we have are initials, PF. But whoever they weren't afraid to add their own spin on things, jazzing up the story a bit here and there. I mean, can you blame them? Being a translator probably wasn't the most thrilling gig around. Enter Christopher Marlo. This guy takes a Faust story and turns it into a play that audiences couldn't get enough for. For context, Marlo was born the same year as Shakespeare, so he was part of the whole Renaissance theater scene. He titled his play The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus. But Marlo himself had quite a backstory too. He was a gay, blasphemous, and he was atheist during the time when those things were seriously frowned upon. Talk about living on the edge. Now, despite those controversies, he met his end not because of his belief or his sexual orientation, but in a bar fight over settling a bill. Some say that Marlo made his own pact with the devil, considering how successful he was being a playwright and being killed just before he turned 29. These Faustian tales strike this weird balance between fear and fascination for us. They're like mirrors that reflect our motivations and help us cement our values. Think about it. One thing we humans can't seem to shake is our desire to cheat death. Just look at all those Live Forever articles that keep popping up on social media feeds lately. Folk tales are littered with characters trying to pull a fast one on the Grim Reaper. But even in the make-believe world of fairy tales, they rarely succeed. Now, even though we can't dodge death forever, there's something enticing about the idea of temporarily putting it aside. Is it these brief pauses from mortality that we're really after? Take the Swedish tale, Grandfather Death, from the collection 100 Favorite Folk Tales. It tells the story of a poor man who chooses death himself as his son's godfather because you make no distinction between high and low. That's what he said in the book. I don't know. Years later, on his wedding night, Death comes for his son and shows him a cave full of candles representing lives. When he sees his own candle flicker out, he begs for no more time, but Death is silent. And just like that, his light goes out and he drops dead. Then there's this cracking story about a blacksmith who manages to trick Death, or in some versions, the devil, which is hands down one of my favorites. In this tale, God grants the smith 3 wishes: a pear tree that chaps anyone who climbs it, an easy chair that holds anyone who sits on it, and a bag that imprisons anyone who climbs into it. The devil comes to claim the smith's soul, but in the end gets stuck up in the pear tree. The smith only frees him after he promises 4 more years of life. When those years are up, the devil gets trapped again in the magic chair, and then later in the bag, each time promising 4 more years before being released. Eventually, though, guilt gets to our crafty blacksmith, and he tries to make things right by knocking on Hell's Gate, only to be turned away by the devil himself. He then tries heaven, where St. Peter is just letting someone in. The gate's still just a little bit ajar, so the smith makes a dash for it, and well, he doesn't get in. Who knows where he ends up? The interesting thing about these tales is how they depict the devil as less of an omnipotent sinister force and more of a fool who could be outsmarted by cunning mortals. Quite different from traditional religious depictions. You know, it's funny. This sort of thing isn't exactly a rare occurrence when it comes to folktales. The whole concept that we can use our wits to beat the devil at his own game is pretty comforting, isn't it? I reckon that some people, and I imagine that's the reason why folks loved these stories so much back in the day and even still do today. Chances are you've been unknowingly consuming this type of narrative for most of your life, just by kicking back and watching TV or catching a flick at the movies. These types of stories have been hiding in plain sight all along. Take a moment to think about movies like The Firm or Silence of the Lambs, or even the classics Damn Yankees, Rosemary's Baby, and The Devil's Advocate. When you strip them down to their bare bones, they're essentially telling the same story. And even Disney's gotten in on the act with The Little Mermaid. Yep, Ariel singing her heart about Under the Sea is following that same Faustian plotline. Who would have thought? Then we switch gears to television, and let's talk about Breaking Bad, seeing as how I'm watching it for the 15th time. Now there's a show that really nails the Faustian storyline. Walter White is cooking up some meth and racking in stacks of cash that he won't possibly have enough time on Earth to spend. The irony is as thick as his wallet. But in my opinion, the top of the pack in Foustian Tales comes from the Harlem, New York-based rapper Immortal Technique in his song, Dance with the Devil. If you've never heard it, I implore you, check it out, and please let me know what you think. The devil grows inside the hearts of the selfish and wicked. White, brown, yellow, black, color is not restricted. You have a self-destructive destiny when you're inflicted, and you'll be one of God's children that fell from the top. There's no diversity because we're burning in the melting pot. So when the devil wants to dance with you, you better say never, because a dance with the devil might last you forever. In 1976, Philip Hester was a 23-year-old man with absolutely no future. A high school dropout with a 9th grade education, working part-time as a car washer at a Chevy dealership outside of Pottsville, Pennsylvania. Watching people come in and out of the dealership and pulling away in cars the boy could only dream of one day owning was slowly starting to weigh heavy on him. During his normal Wednesday night after-work routine of spending his day's pay at the local watering hole, he met someone rather interesting. A man dressed in a light gray suit walked into the bar. A sharp-looking businessman passing through town was his guess, as he's never seen him before, and he stuck out like a sore thumb in this mostly blue-collar town. Below his suit jacket was a matching vest, on top of a white shirt and a deep red tie. On top of his head sat a white driver's cap. Quite frankly, it was the whitest anything Phil has ever laid eyes on. He was a slender man with dark features, dark eyes as well as hair. His smile, on the other hand, was dazzling. The huge toothy grin on his face as he walked in before taking the seat 2 stools down from Philip at the nearly empty bar. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked the stranger. "I'll have a Manhattan, please. Neat. And whatever my young friend is having to my left." "He looks like he's having a rough go of it today," the stranger replies. Philip, who isn't really a social butterfly, awkwardly nods in the man's direction as another Schmidt bottle gets slid down in his direction. The bartender places what is probably the worst Manhattan ever served on a bar napkin in front of the stranger. It was the first one ever ordered inside of Roy's pub, and old Roy himself had to break out the bartender's book to see how to even make one. This was a beer and whiskey joint after all. The stranger picks up his drink and slides down next to Phil and offers him a cheers. They clink bottle and glass as the man introduces himself. "Richard." Philip just looks at the man confused. "Richard Fry. My name, my good boy. Rich to my friends." "Oh," Philip responds. "I'm Phil. Phil Hester. Good to meet you, Richard. Thanks for the beer." "Rich, my boy. I said my friends call me Rich," the man said, followed by that brilliant grin. Now, normally Phil doesn't take kindly to strangers, and he definitely isn't one for small talk, but this man was charming. "Okay then. Thank you, Rich. You ain't from around here, are you? I ain't never seen you before." "No slipping one past you, is there, Phil?" "No, you are right. I am not from around here. You could say I'm only just, passing through. Like the traveling carnival. In town for one night only," the man said with a laugh. "I just stopped in to decompress a bit before I move on, and I'm glad I did. I wouldn't have made a new friend if I didn't. Well, what's your story, Phil? Tell me about yourself. Bartender, get my friend another Schmidt here, please." Phil's life was sort of a tragic one. Originally from New Hampshire, his father, whom if he was still alive the people that knew him would say that Phil was following right in his dad's footsteps, was a slacker and alcoholic. And his mom really wasn't much better, although she did her best to give Phil a good life as a child and attempted to keep her husband on the straight and narrow, even though she treaded the line herself. She should have listened to her parents and stayed away from that man, but young love is a dangerous thing. Phil was only 8 when they died. In a car wreck in 1965, Dad was drunk behind the wheel and veered off a mountain pass, plunging them to their deaths. Phil's grandparents on his mother's side took him in and would often share stories about his no-good father. Apparently, his dad had just won New Hampshire state lottery that only formed in 1964, and the money would have been life-changing. His parents celebrated a little too hard that night and were never able to cash that ticket. Phil's grandparents didn't know if the story was true or not, or if it was just something else that he told his mother to keep her around. Philip told Richard the story of his parents, how he lived with his grandparents until they died, and how he's been renting a room at the edge of town and working part-time at the Chevy dealer. Richard sat there enthralled with the story. Never has anyone paid such attention to the things that Philip was saying.
Phil felt like he was the only person in the room, which was almost true. Aside from the bartender who was cleaning glasses, and old Mr. Thompson, who was unconscious and swollen from drink, passed out in a booth in the back of the place. Phil followed up his story with a question of his own. What do you do, Rich? Well, Phil, I'm kind of a jack of all trades, if I do must say so. I dabble in a little bit of everything. Currently, though, I guess you could say I'm in the talent acquisition field. What's that? Phil genuinely asked, intrigued. Well, basically I travel around and find and recruit folk. My boss thinks I have a real eye for talent. He says I have a silver tongue, but he gives me too much credit. It's the people, Phil. The people I find are the ones that are the real stars of the organization. I just merely bring them to the gate. Richard finished with a final swallow of his drink. Phil, look at you. You have me sitting here all night. Look at the time. I must be going. It was a genuine pleasure to meet you, my boy. Perhaps our paths will cross again in the future. Bartender, get my friend here another drink. And another after that. Put it on my tab. I will be settling up now. And just like that, as fast as he came in, he got up and left. Phil was a little confused about the abruptness of the man leaving, but didn't think much after it after the bartender slid his free beer in front of him. And he had another one coming behind that. Jackpot. After another hour or so, Phil made his exit, and feeling pretty damn good. Not only did he have a solid drunk on him right now, but he barely spent any money in doing so. He crossed the road and made his way to his old jalopy that he called a car, parked across the street. It was his grandfather's, and really the only thing of value that he had in his name. Well, technically it was still in his grandfather's name because Phil didn't have the know-how to transfer registrations, and even if he did, he'd be too lazy to do so. As he was fumbling with his keys trying to get them in the door, and dropping them more times than he'd care to admit, he heard a voice behind him. Going somewhere, Mr. Hester? You're not planning on driving that tonight, are you? Because if you are, we're going to have a little talk. It was Officer Frank Petrie, an old neighbor of Phil's grandparents. A kid who was only a few years older than Phil himself, and one whom Phil hated. Really, the only reason Phil didn't like the man was because one night when he was a kid, Phil was caught going through their shed, and old man Petrie had Frank beat the ever-living piss out of Phil to teach him a lesson. Oh, hey, Frank, Phil slurred. No, man, I'm not going anywhere. Another voice from behind Frank now. Is it in there, Phil? It was Richard, walking up the dark street from behind Officer Frank. My hat, do you see it? I could have sworn I left it in your car. Before Phil could answer, Richard was removing the keys from Phil's hand and opening the door himself. And there it was. That bright white driver's cap, sitting on the front seat. See, I knew it! Turning toward the officer and grabbing his hand to shake it. Thank you so much, officer, for helping my friend to his car. You see, this hat means the world to me. And Phil here thought I may have left it and was checking for me before I walked home. I was in the John checking to see if maybe I hung it up in there. He wasn't planning on driving this car? Frank asked, disbelieving. Before Phil could open his mouth to argue, Richard answered. Heavens no! Where would you get an idea like that? Honestly. This is all just a misunderstanding. I assure you, officer, I'd let no such thing occur. Frank just nodded at the man and told him to have a good night and be careful. Phil didn't know what to say. That could have been a night in the drunk tank. I mean, he's been there before, and Frank just lights up every time he gets to put Phil in there. Thank you, Richard. Rich, my boy. Call me Rich. Okay, Rich. I owe you a little bit, but I'm a little confused. How'd your hat get in my car? The doors were locked. Well, Phil, there's a lot of things I can do. Walk with me. The two men started slowly strolling down the middle of the empty moon-drenched road. Are you happy, Phil? Sure. Don't lie to me, Richard said. I can see right through you, and I know you're not. You have a want in your heart, a want to be looked upon with great respect, a need to be the man that you feel you're destined to be. I can help you accomplish that. Well, I really want a new car, Phil said between hiccups. And a house for my own. I guess I just want what most people want, huh? Of course you do. And I can help you get it. The American dream is right at your fingertips. And it'll only cost you your soul. Phil stopped walking, immediately sobering up. Wait. Did you say my soul? Phil's mood quickly going from happy drunk to anger, as feeling as though this stranger was making fun of him. I sure did. I get it, Phil replied sourly. City guy passing through a small town and wants to have a few laughs making fun of a local. Well, you got the wrong guy, mister. I assure you, Phil, I am not making fun. If you think I'm lying, what do you have to lose? You see, my boss says I'm very good at what I do, and I'm allowed all kinds of liberties to make any kind of deal I want. What do you say? How about it? Sure, Rich. Whatever you say. My soul, you got it. In exchange for? Richard replied with a growing grin. What are the terms? What do you want, my boy? Philip, now just playing along. Well, I want to be rich. No, not just rich. I want to be wealthy. That me and none of mine will ever have to worry about money again. And I want to be successful. I want the name of Hester not to be something that people around here laugh at, but something that people admire. Good show, my friend. But I'm afraid for all that, I'm going to need a little bit more than your soul. Well, what else do you want? Perhaps the soul of your firstborn as well? Yes, promise me the soul of your firstborn, and all what you want and more will be within your grasp. Philip, thinking that he isn't even talking to a woman, never mind having a girlfriend to even have a child with. The last girl he was romantically involved in was during summer camp his grandparents sent him to in the 7th grade, and he got sent home early that summer for burning down the boat launch. He agrees to these terms. Top man, Richard exclaims and pats Phil hard on the back. You're hardly going to regret this. He grabs Philip's hand and gives him a sturdy shake and looks him deep into the man's eyes. That's it. The deal is done. We don't fool around here with a contract. A handshake will do. Speak of this with no one. And with that, I wish you a good evening. Our business here is concluded. Richard makes an about face and starts making his way down the street the way they came. Phil turns to him and says, Okay, pal. Yeah, it was real nice meeting you, he says with an eye roll. Thanks for the beers. Richard turns to Philip, and that's when Phil noticed his eyes were a different color. Well, a different color was wrong. They were still dark. But the whites of his eyes were now equally as dark. Grinning at Phil, he lifts his stark white cap and places it on his head and says to him, Philip, it was an absolute pleasure. I'll be seeing you soon. And with that, he turned and walked out of Phil's life. The next morning for Philip started like most mornings, with a god-awful hangover and a little hair of the dog. But that day was different. When he made his way downstairs from the room he rents, he had mail sitting on the table by the front door. He almost walked right past it because he never gets mail. He has no one in his life to send him any. It had postage on it from New Hampshire, a place he hasn't been back to since he was a kid. It also required a signature upon delivery, to which the nice old lady who rented him the room had signed. Opening the envelope and pulling out the letter, it read, Dear Mr. Hester, I hope this letter finds you well. You are a hard man to track down. I will keep this short and sweet. In 1965, your father, a Philip Hester Sr., was the winner of the New Hampshire State Lottery, totaling $98,000, then known as the New Hampshire Sweepstakes. He began the process of cashing out his winnings before his untimely death. The money was kept in an account while his next of kin was located. Being that it was your mother, Ellen, and she also perished in the same accident, the money was bounced around to different state agencies while you were located. Long story short, bureaucracy got in the way and the money was forgotten about until I took over the agency. Your winnings have been kept in an escrow account until the proper person, which is you, could be found. With interest, your pot has grown to $142,000. Congratulations, Philip, and I'm sorry for your loss. Signed, Martin Scroll, New Hampshire State Treasurer. Dictated but not read. Behind the letter was a certified bank check made out to Philip in the amount of $142,000. Philip almost fainted, and just like that, he'd forgotten all about the handshake. And it turns out Phil wasn't as dumb as we all thought. Working at the car dealership, washing cars, and spending time with the salesman, he picked up some things through osmosis. And when he heard that the dealership he worked for was going up for sale in a few days, for a mere $99,000, Philip made the purchase. The owner didn't believe it at first, but once the check cleared and the lawyers confirmed that the assets were legit, the deal was made. It was a whirlwind of a time for Phil. And would you know it, he turned that dying Chevy dealership around. It became the #1 selling car dealership in the state. Well, by then he had enough capital to buy another, then another, and another. By 1983, he was the owner of the Hester Auto Group, the largest car dealership chain in the country. That was also the same year his wife, Sally, who was the receptionist at the dealership when he washed cars there. gave birth to their first child, a son, which they named Philip III. Life was good. Life was really, really good. In the time since receiving the winnings from his parents' lotto, Philip went from zero to hero, basically. He purchased his grandparents' old home, essentially just to keep it in their memory, and had beautiful, intricate headstones replace the generic ones the cemetery provided to the people who couldn't afford anything else for his parents. On the day his son was born, he was flooded with phone calls and congratulation gifts from all his friends and colleagues. It was when he opened the card in the black envelope that made his blood run cold. It was a generic card with a blue flower on the front. When he unfolded it, the message simply read, "Told you so. Can't wait to meet the little fella. See you soon. Rich." The memories of that night came flooding back. He made his way to his bar and tore open a bottle of whiskey and took a big swig. Now that he thinks of it, this was his first drink since that night. I wish I could say it was his last. In the years that followed, Philip retreated from family and friends the night his son was born. Remembering what had happened that night in front of Roy's pub shook him to his core. He refused to believe that this was a coincidence. He fell back into a bottle and never found his way back out. The day of his son's 18th birthday, Philip found himself on his deathbed, suffering from cirrhosis of the liver. With his son at his side, he explained what happened to him that day in 1976, and warned him to watch out for the sharp-dressed man in the white hat. Young Philip chalked this up to the amount of medication his father was on. Philip III had to take up a lot of responsibility once his father had passed away. His mother, unable to cope with the alcohol abuse, decided if you can't beat them, join them, and had her demons in the bottle as well. She hardly got out of bed anymore, and when she did, the young man had to carry her back to bed, or to the bathroom to clean the vomit off herself that she made. One summer afternoon, there was a knock at the front door. Sally was sleeping, as usual, and Phil had just gotten home from visiting his girlfriend. Upon opening the door, he was greeted with a dazzling smile. A very well-dressed, handsome man wearing a white driver's cap. Kids nowadays call them Kangol hats. "Good afternoon, Phil. The name is Richard Fry, but my friends call me Rich. That's what your dad called me. Me and him go way back." The man in the white hat? This can't be the same man that my dad was talking about. Those were the incoherent ramblings of a drugged-up, dying man. But here he was, standing at his threshold. "May I come in, my boy, or are you just going to leave me standing in the doorway looking at me like that?" Yes, I'm sorry. Please, come in. You said you were a friend of my dad's?" "Yes, you could put it that way. I believe he told you about me." How did this man know what my dad told me? He told me those things hours before he died. And as if Richard was reading the boy's mind, he answered the question. "That's the reason I'm here to see you. Now, while there was nothing in writing, that is essentially against the rules. A breach of contract. Our agreement must not be spoken about. It would have slipped right by me. I normally don't look in much on people on their deathbeds. A bit of a respect thing, you know. But you see, I saw your father this morning." "What?" Philip interrupted. You saw my dad?" Richard, looking at Philip, quite annoyed after being cut off. "Like I said, I saw your father this morning, and he told me of your conversation, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to collect on mine and his agreement early. I hope you understand. He didn't seem too keen on the idea of me coming to collect you, but there really wasn't much he could do about it. He had a 2 o'clock flaying today with Azroth, and boy, that boy sure does enjoy his work. He would be tied up for days." Phil took a few steps back, really confused. "Wait, my life? That story was true? No, it can't be. Wait, there has to be some way we can resolve this. Perhaps a new deal can be arranged." "I'm listening," Richard responded, intrigued at the possibility. "Well, what was my dad's agreement with you?" "Your dad gave up his soul, as well as yours, a quite cowardly thing if you ask me, in exchange for every luxury you indulge in today. You had a great run. Much better off than your father was at your age. You've never wanted for anything." But there was something that Phil wanted. He wanted his mother back. "I'll make a deal. In exchange for my soul, I want you to fix my mother, make her better. Help her, please." Richard looked taken aback. "You know, in all the years I've been doing this, hardly anyone ever asked for something that doesn't greatly benefit themselves. That is very selfless of you, my boy, but unfortunately, I already own your soul, so hop to it." With that, an enormous dagger, dripping with gore, appeared in Richard's hand as he stepped aggressively towards Philip. Wait, Phil said with his hands out. "I'll make the same deal as my dad then. my unborn child. In exchange for your mother's well-being? Yeah, that's it. Just make my mom normal again. And no matter what happens, she stays that way. Done. The dagger vanishes and Richard turns around and out the front door. At that moment, a call came from upstairs. Phil? Philly? Are you home, hon? I was going to order some lunch. Are you interested? Or would you like to maybe go somewhere? You're not too old to be seen out with your mother, are you? Phil turned back and looked outside, but Richard was gone. Phil and his mom went out and had a wonderful afternoon together. They had a great lunch and stopped by one of the dealerships because, as Mom put it, we got to show face around here and get everyone comfortable seeing you, Phil. This is going to be all yours one day. Phil just smiled, but he knew it wouldn't. He made this deal knowing full well what he was going to do. He wasn't going to risk subjecting more people to this, more of his loved ones, current or future, going down this path, damning his bloodline to being essentially in hock to the devil or whatever he was. At 10 p.m. that night, Philip kissed his mother on her cheek while she watched a TiVoed episode of Gilmore Girls sitting on the couch, and made his way out back to the pool house and took his own life with his dad's revolver. The funeral was beautiful. Friends, family, and employees and colleagues filled the church. A very handsome man, his mom noticed, in a white hat stood at the church steps and watched the service through the open doors. Many tears were shed that day. Sally sat up front next to Rebecca, who was Phil's girlfriend. She was devastated. She was with him the entire morning the day he committed suicide, and said nothing about him seemed off that day. He was his normal, loving self. She missed him so much already, and knew her life was not going to be the same. She was full of regrets. Regret she didn't get to kiss him one more time. Regret she didn't end their last call with "I love you." Regret she never got the chance to tell him that he was going to be a dad. I'm Christopher Feinstein, and this is Haunted American History. Music by Kevin MacLeod.